Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm Shameika Rhymes, and welcome to Soulibration. Let me know where you're watching from. Drop it in the chat. Have you ever really questioned, who am I? And wondered, how do I figure that out? Because I know I've asked that many, many times. If you've ever asked that question, drop it in the chat. Well, you're not alone. Tonight, therapist Paul Williams is back. He's going to talk about how to discover if you maybe are suffering from an identity crisis. Maybe you have some trauma you need to heal so you can discover your authentic self. So make sure you share this episode, but also drop your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them throughout the show. But first, let me remind y'all who Paul is. Paul Bache Williams is a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, keynote relationship advisor, business owner, entrepreneur, corporate consultant, and author. And his counseling services can be found at heartsandmindcounseling.com. Let's bring Paul on.
Hey, good evening.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Always happy to be here. Excited to be back and have this conversation.
Yeah, so let's start this off with, can you explain what it means when you're struggling to find your identity, whether it's professionally or in your personal life, and how do you even know that you're struggling?
Well, essentially, we're talking about an identity crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I? How did I get here? What are my experiences? What do I believe in? What are my core values? What are my core beliefs? And when you start to question that, you're unsure, then that's when you fall into that identity crisis, right? Who am I showing up today? And why am I showing up this way today? And we have to ask ourselves those questions because so many things, I know we're going to get into it, but so many things impact who we show up as and who we believe that we are.
You know what? You just brought something up because I just remember, actually, it was last night. Someone asked me, what are your core values? And I had to go look up. And that's a shame. I had to go look up what are core values. So you might have to explain that to little old me and everybody else. Can we do that real quick?
But this is something I do too, right? Because you want to get to the definition of it, but then you want to describe it in a way that it fits you. There's nothing wrong with not having an answer when it's posed to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Give yourself the grace and the permission to go look it up and decide, okay, what can I pull from this to help me identify my core values, right? Are some of my core values like honesty, integrity, truthfulness, hard work, kindness, I guess you think of it like fatherhood is one of them. It's just like chivalry is one of them. It can be a myriad of things. It's again, what keeps you driving? Like when I look at myself, how do I want to describe myself? Like what are the characteristics? When you talk about character, like if somebody were to describe me, I want to ask my closest people who know me, how would they describe me? And one thing that sticks out is a close friend of mine, Unika J, and she says at my 5-year anniversary, she says that I'm the same online that I am offline. There's no differentiation. I'm not pretending to be something. I'm consistent across the board. With friendships comes to boundaries and everything.
I would agree. I would agree. Yeah. And thank you, because you just gave me some core values to add to my list. Thank you for that.
Coach Stephanie Ray. Hey, Stephanie, she said compassion. Compassion is definitely one of those things.
Absolutely. Well, let's just start from the beginning. So how can someone begin to identify and acknowledge, like maybe it's trauma that's keeping them from discovering who they really are, especially if that trauma has been buried for years? So how might it be impacting their day-to-day life and relationships, again, in the workplace and in their personal relationships?
Yeah, people don't really understand that trauma paralyzes us. It keeps us in that state mentally, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes physically, sometimes spiritually, right? If my trauma comes up, it impacts the way I think. It disrupts my sound thinking, my sound mind. Trauma has an influence on how we show up, how we respond to certain things. And a lot of times people don't understand that there's a trauma response versus how they really feel because they want to protect themselves from ever experiencing that again. Right. And I was literally writing this article on one of our blogs. I was talking about 5 ways trauma prevents you from feeling protected, right? And trauma is like the fly that shows up to the picnic,
Yes.
making all the noise, disrupting the fun. If you're on a date, it's disrupting the connection. Now your focus is on that fly, and that fly does not ask for permission to be there. It feels entitled to be there, and it just disrupts peace. So now you have to move from your plans because trauma has showed up and it's making all that noise. And don't let it land on your food, right?
Right.
You got to throw the whole thing away. So
Right.
it shows up like we really have to pay attention to, is this my trauma or
Mhm.
is this something that I need to investigate, right? Well, both we really need to investigate, uh,
Mhm.
but identify where the trauma first started, because sometimes, again, we get paralyzed in our trauma and that's why we don't move forward in certain areas of our lives.
Well, if the trauma is buried deep, 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 and I had this experience where it's buried so deep that I didn't even remember it. How
Mhm.
do you? I mean, I know what I did to try to get to the root of what it was, but what are some ways people can maybe try to work to figure out if it's been buried for so long? Like it's almost like I know there's something, but I don't remember or know what it is. I mean, yes, therapy could help, I'm sure.
I was gonna say, definitely get with a specialist. You don't want to just be out here finding anybody that says I understand trauma. They're going
Mhm.
to ignite that trauma and not know what to do with it. So get with a professional to really explore that. I know some therapists who use the river technique. Right, if you describe yourself going down a river, describe yourself from childbirth into this certain point. When did life become disrupted? Right, when does something happen to you? Would kind of shift your perspective on, maybe you're a happy baby, a happy
Mhm.
child, and something happened and you started to be guarded, right? If you think about your daily life, if you think about I guess, some parts of your journey, what about that part sticks out the most? We have the inner bully, we have the
Mhm.
inner teen, we have um, relationship trauma, whether it's with a parent, sibling, a friend in childhood. We have workplace trauma. There's so many different things that play a role in how we show up.
Mhm. Okay. Would you say that, well, to start that process of trying to figure out who you are, I mean, you kind of mentioned it a little bit about, thinking about those core values, finding a specialist to help uncover some of the deep rooted trauma. But is there anything else that, say, somebody doesn't believe they have any trauma at all, which, everybody I feel like has trauma, some kind of trauma. But what are some initial steps that they could start to take to kind of figure out, who am I? What is my identity?
Definitely self exploration, right? We got to
Mhm.
figure out who we are, why we are, how we are. You can even explore your family origin, right? Because
Mhm.
everybody has a sense of trauma, especially in our Black community. Like, we
Right.
carry trauma in our tissue. Like, we have generational trauma. You may be experiencing the pain that your great 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 grandparent has experienced, and it shows up, and you don't know why you do this thing, right? That's something that they've experienced that you've carried on, and you don't even realize it. And we just say, "Well, this is just what I do,"
Mhm.
right? But sometimes it doesn't seem normal. So again, when you go into the self exploration, when you go into those core values, ask yourself, why do you do the things that you do? Why do you like the things that you like?
Mhm.
Why do you operate in relationships the way that you do? What do you give yourself and what do you take away from yourself? What do you block yourself from? What do you protect yourself from? What are
Mhm.
you skeptical about? What would your happiest day look like if you were giving yourself permission to have that happy day?
Oh,
Right?
that's
Because
good.
sometimes if you describe that, you block yourself from saying, well, this can't happen because I remember the last time I was vulnerable. And the trauma reminds me of vulnerability means that I'm susceptible to being hurt.
Mhm.
So you're
Right.
having those conversations with, of course, a professional or with yourself.
Ooh, Paul, you making me think about all the homework I'm gonna have to do. Everyone, don't forget to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them as we can. But how can someone? So most people, especially Black folks, we have so many roles that we play in our lives, right? We've got, whether you're a parent or you're the boss of your company, or you're the daughter, the son, the mother, all the things. How can someone differentiate between the roles that they play in their life and their true authentic self?
I love kind of giving a visual of this, right?
Okay.
You and I can't draw, so a stick figure, right,
Okay.
in the middle of the paper, and then you have these branches that point to all the things that you do,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those are roles, those are choices, those are decisions, but you are who you are without any of those things happening, right? And then now you ask yourself, why do I show up in this role this way?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I parent this way? Why do I supervise or boss this way? Where do I learn that from? Like, what experiences that I have that kind of shift the way that I originally thought that this is supposed to be the way to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, without anything that you do, because a role, and go back to Google. Let's Google what role
Right.
means, right? We need to utilize that because it's right there
Right.
and identify what that looks like and what is your role in your relationship and what is your role in your family. Because you think about a parentified child, that's the child that was raised to be an adult at an early age, taking care of the siblings or
Mm-hmm.
having to work sooner than later, didn't really have a childhood. They grow up to be that parent in all their relationships. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of their childhood that was been lost, but that little part of their childhood screams sometimes and wants attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then they minimize it because they remember being minimized as a child. So now we take on the voices of our parents to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and tell the little one, you can't come out and play. It's time to go work. You got people to take care of. That's why
Right.
people don't know how to take a vacation. People don't know how to not work, right? Tell ourselves this is what we're supposed to do because we have people to take care of
Mm-hmm.
when we don't have other people as responsibilities.
So glad you brought this up about that little child inside of us all, right? Because as I'm scrolling through social media, sometimes I see all this, heal your inner child, and it's people doing workshops or it's meditations on YouTube and all these things. Do those work, or is it just you've got to, like you said, really do the work, go to a therapist, and be guided along that way to tap into that inner child? Like, how do you heal that?
So it's so convoluted. If you go on social media, like you said, sometimes there's a therapist doing it. Sometimes there's a
Mhm.
random person who woke up this morning and said, you know what, I read this book, so I'm going to become a inner child coach.
Mhm.
I would say definitely investigate, right?
Okay.
And if you see parts of your younger self that makes you make the decisions that you do,
Mhm.
let's figure out where that comes from and how to heal that. And I think I mentioned this before, growing up at one particular time playing on the basketball team, I didn't have the sneaker that everybody had. We didn't raise
Mhm.
enough money. So because of that, once I started to make money, I got every sneaker came out because
Mhm.
I didn't want that inner child, that little boy who didn't have the sneaker to ever feel
Mhm.
like that again.
Mhm.
Right. If there's times where we've been neglected or somebody told us no or to get away from something because we don't look like we can afford it, we now show up in that space buying things we don't necessarily need because
Mhm.
we're trying to heal that inner child who was denied something.
Ooh, that makes so much sense. I'm just thinking about all the people that purchase a lot of shoes. I'm like, oh, maybe that's the reason. Um, well, this brings me to another point. So you just making me think of things. I was having a discussion with someone last week, I think, where the topic was they said it felt like professionally and in their personal life, it felt like they were constantly not being heard, not being seen. Would that go back to the inner child?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely can. So there's two things, right? You might literally not be being
Yeah.
heard or seen, right? There's
Mhm.
people who simply don't value other people's opinions, thoughts, purpose, roles in people's lives, right?
Mhm.
So that may be happening. When you ask yourself if a person is listening to you, a person is showing you that they value you, but you still don't feel heard, then we got to figure out where that's coming from, right? What part of
Right.
you is not being heard? And sometimes it's the silent part of us that we haven't shared with other people that's not being heard. Like I've seen
Mhm.
that in relationships where people don't know how to really communicate. the underlying issues.
Mm-hmm.
All they know is how to talk. They
Yeah.
struggle with communication, and a lot of times they know how to make noise, but they don't know how to make sound judgment and clear communication on what
Mm-hmm.
they need, on what they're experiencing.
Okay. Well, this kind of goes along with this, but what role does self awareness play in this process? So you kind of went over that a little bit, but can we just talk a little bit more about it, especially when you're trying to figure out who you are? For example, my therapist gave me an 11-page workbook type thing to just really journal, to go through, like, and it asked questions that it made me pause, because usually I'm just going to go through and, oh yeah, this and on to the next thing, but I had to pause and think about, like, is this why I do this,
Mhm.
those type of things. So
Yeah.
what how can self I mean, I guess that's an example, but how can self-awareness play a role in that process?
I think it's very important because I need to know who I am in any space that I'm in, right? Self
Hmm.
awareness is also knowing where things came from. And self awareness is knowing that how I want to show up in a different space and what I need from me to show up in that specific space, right?
Right.
Uh, Self awareness is also understanding an environment and knowing that I can't be the same in a sense that I can't be unprofessional in the boardroom,
Hmm.
right? And it's not code switching, it's understanding what the environment is. Like, am I self aware enough to know that I can't come to a board meeting in flip flops and
Right.
a t-shirt because that's not professional, right? So I
Hmm.
need to be self-aware and understand that I need to be present at all times. I think self-awareness is about being present with yourself at all times.
Hmm.
If I were to really break it down to a simplest form, is to being really present with yourself at all times.
What if you struggle with being present, period? I mean, I know there are people I've heard, or I see a lot of, I need to get off social media sometimes, but I start going down rabbit holes, and I see there's been threads where people have been talking about, sometimes they don't know how to be present, even when there's someone else sitting right in front of them, or if they are on a date, what are they doing? Picking up their phone, or they're taking a picture of their food, or they're not really focused on what's in front of them. So I guess it's kind of like putting a mirror in front of yourself too, right?
We're in a world. We live in a world of distractions, right?
Hmm.
We live in a world of the opportunity of something else to do when you're
Hmm.
doing something.
Yeah.
So I think about how social media has conditioned us to be that person, right?
Hmm.
We like to talk about a date, but without being present to it. Sometimes we go into dates planning with that date and the outcome of the date, and we predict and we show up and we already process the
Hmm.
outcome that we plan, and that's not even what happened.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine, like you said, showing up to a date and saying, you know what, telling your homeboys or homegirls, we're going to this particular restaurant. I'm going here because this particular reason, this particular state. I want to take my pictures, I want to post them on social media. You guys aren't present. Your phones get more attention than each other. You
Hmm.
don't have agreements where you put the phones in the basket, where you really engage with each
Right.
other, because you're constantly distracted. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of different self-diagnosed ADHD. There's a lot of different people with lack of discipline and discernment when it comes to being present with each other.
Right.
But there's also true mental illness that comes into play that impacts you being present.
That's interesting, because I'm just thinking, even scrolling, like you're scrolling, watching TV, and it's like you can't just watch TV. You got to be doing like 50 things. That's me. You got to be doing 50 things, even talking on the phone. My friend will be like, "Are you typing?" Yes.
And so, with that, I always tell people to really investigate that.
Yeah.
What's the challenge with focusing on one thing? I
Yeah.
even like raising my son. I knew some of it. Like, one time he said he wanted a fidget spinner. I think that's what they call.
Hmm.
And he wanted one because his classmates had one. So I helped him really understand why his classmate had one and why
Hmm.
he didn't need one. Because he didn't need to be distracted, because when we did homework, TV was off, your focus at
Yeah.
the table. So a lot of times our kids are doing the homework with the TV on, the parent
Hmm.
is talking, the parent is cooking, um, There's so much noise in the background, and
Right.
so they learn that that's how they focus. They focus with noise.
Mm.
They
Yeah.
learn with noise, right? That's outside of an actual, diagnosis of mental health or mental illness. Um, but again, like you said, I catch myself sometimes. It's like, all right, let me be present to this movie, because when I'm at home, I'm scrolling. But if I
Right.
go to the movies, I'm not bringing my phone out.
Right. Right. Same.
So it's a conscious decision to
Yeah.
say, I want to really focus in the environment. Again, we don't restrict ourselves enough to be as present as we need to be in those moments.
Okay. Guys, don't forget, drop your questions in the chat so we can get to them. So, how can individuals reconnect with their passion and interests that may have been overshadowed by trauma, just lifing, and they have to figure out, what do I even like? Like, I used to, for example, I don't play tennis, but I'm using this as an example. I used to go play tennis, and now I've just been so busy, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. How can they reconnect with like their passion? Because that may be the core of their identity.
Go play tennis.
But what if they can't? They can't figure out, like, that's what they need to do. That's what their inner child is saying, go do.
Right. So that's what I mean. Sometimes we we can simplify these things by just doing it, right?
Yeah.
There's a level of, again, when you talk about self exploration, there's a period of time where I went and I did a 31-day self care calendar,
Mm-hmm.
and each day I just came up with an idea that I used to do, something that I would want to explore, and I just did it, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't anything big. It was like, create a playlist and ride in a car,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was go to yoga. It was exercise. It was meditate. It was go try on a suit. It was go get a tie. It was go test drive a car that I really wanted and just experience the feeling, right?
Yeah.
Even if I couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
It was go play basketball with my bad knees and everything, but go see what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
It just wasn't that bad. I can't jump and do the things that I used to do, but I
Mm-hmm.
can shoot around, right?
Yeah.
Play a card game, call one of your old buddies and reminisce about different things. And that brings up stuff, because sometimes in conversation, it reminds us of the things that we used to love.
Oh, yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, you know what? I need to do that. I need to do that. Develop a routine. And also, again, at the core of it is give yourself permission to explore
Mm-hmm.
those old things and new things.
I love that. Even, I would say, even watch a cartoon that you used to love, because I do that sometimes. I'm like, Jim and the Holograms. And still know all the songs.
Yeah. Listen, Fraggle Rock came on a couple of years ago, and I immediately turned into that little boy
Yeah.
watching Fraggle Rock, and I got emotional. I was like, what is
Mm-hmm.
going on? Where is this coming from? But I didn't stop myself from being emotional. I was just like, man, Fraggle Rock. I remember when life was so simple.
Right.
Bills, some Cheerios, fruit, and Fraggle Rock.
The good old days. So, how important is self compassion when you are trying to figure out who you are? Because, I mean, you mentioned that earlier, but I think people tend to forget that. It's like, I got to figure out who I am. I got to oh, I haven't figured it out yet. And then they're so hard and tough on themselves, because then they start maybe getting mad or blaming themselves because they can't figure out who they are. So, how important is self compassion?
Yeah, definitely, it's very important, because we have to understand that always in a process of changing and growing, right?
Hmm.
Our relationships with ourselves are forever, right? We're constantly growing. And if I identify with that and I say, you know what, even if I want to get back to a place that I used to be, and maybe that's not feasible, maybe that's not the right thing I need to do, I can give myself self compassion and not beat myself up for it and say, you know what, it's okay to shift.
Hmm.
During this process of self exploration, and understanding myself, I'm giving myself grace. I'm slowing down. I'm not beating myself up, and I'm also recognizing all the things that I did to get to where I am now.
Yeah.
We tend to forget that, And again, when you are raised a certain way and you experience certain things, we feel like we always have to be doing something. And sometimes identifying that I need to rest is self compassion. I don't need to beat myself up. Let me just acknowledge who I am right now,
Yeah.
embrace that, and then ask myself, what do I need in this particular moment? And ask yourself, how do I get that? Rely on community if needed, professional if needed. Or sometimes we say, you know what, that's something that I thought I wanted to do, but I don't really want to do that. And be
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. You better preach, especially the rest part. That part right there, I think, because for those of us that work, like, so what I started doing, this may help somebody, but what I started doing is I set aside one weekend day and it's rest. I don't open this laptop. I don't do anything. And I'm intentional, put my phone on do not disturb, and I'm going to watch TV so I can be present and focus on it. I'm going to cook and do whatever, but do one thing at a time and rest. So you just like confirm that I'm on the right path. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Let's see. We have a question from Lynette McCallum. How to not allow trauma to affect your future decisions and be open to things that may bring those feelings up and not shut down?
Well, a lot of people think avoidance is the answer, but that's not the answer.
Mm,
Addressing it is the way that we move forward. And being honest with yourself and understanding that trauma may impact your future decisions, but you have to ask yourself, how will it impact your future decisions?
hmm
Is it something that stalls you, prevents you, or is it something that you take with you and say, I understand what happened here. I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again, or I need extra tools to make sure that it doesn't prevent me from achieving my goals. Because we all carry trauma,
Right.
right? Again, if I talk about a knee injury, right, that's trauma to the knee. Like I have a
hmm
slight tear in my meniscus, and so some exercises I can't do
hmm
unless I have my knee brace.
Paul, are we the same person? Because I just wore my knee brace up these stairs because of my meniscus tear.
Right. But I didn't let that traumatic
Right.
event stop me from walking. It
Yeah.
doesn't stop me from exercising. I just have to shift a little bit.
hmm
And I have to protect that knee. I have to give it grace. And I also have to build the muscles around it in order to strengthen, in order to have and be able to function with that knee. So what are you strengthening around that traumatic event to allow you to move forward?
Oh, that's good. So well, that's a good one. But what are some other common obstacles that people might face when they're trying to heal trauma? For example, let me see if I can explain this in the way I mean this question. So you're trying to heal trauma, you're going to therapy, and it's opening up some wounds because you're trying to heal it. But how can you get to this, rediscovering yourself, your true authentic self, if the wounds keep opening and then all these negative thoughts come rushing in, like all the flies decide to lay on, like sit on the potato salad, then what?
Again, but you're still moving forward. And that's the thing that people don't give themselves enough credit about, right? We
Uh-huh.
don't give ourselves enough credit that as we're addressing these things, we're making a conscious decision to get better. So
Right.
when it shares up, when it shows up and it pops up for us, we have to address the wounds because we've been ignoring it for so long. So now that I'm
Mhm.
addressing the wound, I recognize now it's painting a picture. Now we're going down the river. Now we know that the reason why we stopped doing a certain thing was because of the trauma, right? And if the trauma is too much, we got to figure out with that professional what I need to do in order to move forward. Or is this something that tells us I no longer need to invest any time, space, energy in this particular relationship, connection, or thing?
Mhm. Okay. Well, what advice do you have for someone who does feel lost and disconnected from their true identity and say they've gone to therapy and they still feel disconnected and can't figure it out?
Yeah, again, you said something major. When you talked about journaling, and like with self discovery, there's worksheets out there. When you ask yourself, like, if I were to ask you now, what are your strengths? How would you answer
Oh, like for real? Like
that?
Oh wow. Now you done put me on the spot, Paul. I would say hmm, I'd have to refer back to my journal because I don't remember what I wrote. That was because you
But that's
put me on the spot. Now I'm like I'm turning red.
but most
We'll
people
just say
struggle
we'll
with
just
that.
yeah, we'll
Most
just say like I think one of mine is showing up. I think that's a strength. Showing
Mhm.
up.
Okay. Yeah. So if you think about it now, me on the outside looking in, I think your strength is the way that you journal, you journal, right? The way that you
Mhm,
write, the way that you speak, the way that you perform, the way that you, like you said, show up. And
mhm,
you talked about the things that you do for yourself, right?
yeah.
Those are some of your strengths. You're able to really identify what people need. And that's why
Mhm,
you're in the position that you are,
mhm,
right? And so now you have to investigate, what do you do for yourself that's a strength?
mhm.
So there's a process too. But again, I'm going to go back to the good old Google strengths.
Yeah.
Like in one of the worksheets that I pass to clients when they struggle with that, I ask them and then maybe they can't answer. And then I give them a worksheet and I say, circle all the strengths that you think that you are or that you
Ah,
have. And by the time they finish, they then circle 20 strengths. He's like, you know what? I'm good at this. You know what? Yeah, I do this. You know
yeah.
what? People say that I'm great at this. So it's good to, again, to investigate that. And we don't always have to have the answers right away. Use resources.
Hmm. So now that if you've done all this work, you've done your worksheets, your journaling, talking to your therapist, and you found your authentic, true self, you've reclaimed your identity, and people around you are like, "Who are you?" Like, what? I don't recognize this person. You now you're acting funny. How do you set those boundaries with now that you've become this new, not really a new, but you've reclaimed who you are?
That question, well, who is this new person? The first answer is, I'm who I need to be.
Ooh.
That's that's who I need to be at this particular point.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things that I allowed to happen before didn't serve me well, didn't feel good. So now I am practicing boundaries and I'm able to communicate what I need in this moment. Right, implementing the boundaries is so important, and people who love you will honor your boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Not people who love you the way that you are for them, but people who love you for you. That's a difference,
Right.
right? Because again, some people are used to you being your unhealed self, and they
Mm-hmm.
connect with that, right? Whether that's a trauma bond, whether that wound, or that gives them some self confidence. Some people love that. Some people thrive in that. But the people who are on the same journey or who honor and say, you know what, I love what you're doing with yourself. I love that you're taking care of yourself. I love that you're choosing you. I
Mm-hmm.
love that you set these boundaries. It'll take me, and they'll be able to communicate too. It'll take me a little while to adjust to the new you, but it's worth it. You're worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think like affirmations, saying them every day in the mirror and doing all those things helps? I'm just curious if you as a therapist, if you think that helps.
Yeah, it works for some.
Okay.
There's it's not a one size fit all,
Hmm.
but in the affirmations don't always have to be like I'm great, I'm this, I'm
Right.
that. Is I'm allowed to give myself what I need. I'm allowed to take a break. Right?
Hmm.
I'm allowed to value myself. Right? It
Hmm.
really depends on what you're doing. I forgive myself. Like looking in the mirror and saying I forgive
Ooh,
you.
yes.
That's an affirmation,
Hmm.
right? And then you also think about as spiritual beings, we think about like what is your relationship if you believe in God, like what is your relationship with God and what are you confessing and what are you connecting your life to in those particular moments?
Ooh, I like that. Since you brought up forgiveness, I did have a forgiveness question because what role does forgiveness play, especially of yourself and of others, maybe those that cause the trauma or those that, you have trauma bonded with? What role does forgiveness play in the process of reclaiming your identity?
It plays a major role in that, especially the forgiveness of yourself, because if we don't forgive ourselves, we stay paralyzed in this position that we are, right? We
Hmm.
tell ourselves that we don't deserve different. We go back into the same relationships with different people,
Right.
and we tell ourselves we don't, again, deserve to grow. So
Hmm.
if I don't forgive myself, I still see myself as the mistake that I made. And we attach ourselves with or to the mistake as opposed to removing the mistake and saying, you know what, I made a mistake, I forgive myself. All right. And then we think about also who people who have hurt us. And forgiveness looks different. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation or reconnection. Forgiveness means that I no longer have to get revenge on you. Forgiveness means that you no longer have access to me or the parts of me that you have harmed, right? Because there's a difference between a boundary and a grudge. A grudge is something that you're upset about. A grudge is that you hold and you mention it to them. You let them know this hurt. You let them know they can never do this again. You're consistently in that wound, in that pain. But a boundary is like, yeah, you did this, it hurt. So we're no longer going to communicate in this particular area that you harmed.
Ooh, okay. What about when said person that you're like, I'm trying to forgive you, but and you're still allowing them access to you, say whether it's just, you speak every now and again, and then they throw up whatever that is in your face when they get mad. Then what do you do? Is that
ask yourself, is that your responsibility to repair every time you're reminded?
Okay.
So, and also ask yourself, what is the value and what is the purpose of that connection? Because sometimes we allow our guilt to stay connected to people that cause us harm. We allow history to tell us that we need to stay connected to a person that causes harm. We allow routine. We allow their words, shame, a bunch of different things to keep us connected to people who have hurt us. So if somebody continues to harm you, somebody continues to remind you of different things, ask them, like, what do they get from that? Like, what is the goal of consistently reminding me of this particular thing? And if I harm someone, what do you need from me to heal from that? Like, what part can I play? I can't heal you, of course, but what part can I play? Like, what closure, what support? What does that look like from my end?
So how does that? So with forgiveness, because sometimes something will happen and I'll just say I forgive you, and then I'll think about it a couple days later, like, wait a minute, did they just like, it's like I didn't fully process whatever it was they did. I just because of my beliefs, I'm like, I have to forgive this person and then move on. So how do you know when you've truly absolutely forgiven someone?
I guess the second, third, fifth, 12th time that you made the decision to forgive them, just like yourself. And people think that the one time that I say I forgive you is the one time, or is that's going to be the last time I remember the pain that you caused. No, you can say you forgive someone, and it can be authentic, or it can be a process of communication with a person, but then you feel the pain all over. So you have to ask yourself, what do you need to forgive them again? Because you're forgiving somebody for the same thing over and over again. If you've been physically harmed by someone, let's say, I don't know, cut, right? That scar is there. So you're going to remember that scar later, and then you're going to say, you know what? I'm going to get mad. I remember the moment. Okay, what do I need in this moment for me to first give myself permission to be okay? And second, what do I need to forgive them again?
Gotcha. Okay. That's good. So what are some signs that someone is living in their true self? They're in alignment with who their identity is. What are some signs that someone would be able to tell, like, yes, I am finally the true me that I knew I could be?
Knowing that I'm constantly growing. I think alignment is agreement, right? Alignment is, for me, alignment is God, right? That's what alignment looks like. It's something out of my control. Alignment happens. But when a person has really identified themselves, they've given themselves permission to make mistakes and to grow from them. A person who has identified themselves, they've forgiven themselves for the things that they've experienced, the things that they've done. A person who is alignment with themselves also allows themselves to rest, right? And if in my fullness, I know that I don't always have to perform. I know that if I rest, I'm okay, right? I'm not a failure. Rest doesn't equal failure or insufficiency. So if you talk about a person that's really living in their fullness, They know that it's a process, it's a lifelong process of living and understanding and getting to know myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's never finished.
Never. Never. Well, so when you're on this healing journey and you're trying to reclaim your identity, during that process, and say there's some other life-changing things that come along, like a new job, you get married, a new baby or whatever it is, how would you tell someone, okay, because they're going to be like, okay, now does my identity shift? Do we go back to the stick figure? Is that what we do?
Yeah, we go back to
Okay.
the role, right? Because when I work with moms, or I work with dads, I work with husbands and wives,
Mm-hmm.
I work with CEOs, right? Who are you before you go to work? And sometimes people can't really identify with that because they take work home. Who are you if you didn't have to go to work tomorrow? Right?
Yeah.
I think even as a parent, you ask yourself, as you're taking care of your kid, as you're not taking care of you, when your kid is sleeping, who do you give yourself permission to be? All right. If your kid is sleeping, who do you give yourself permission to be? Who were you before you became a parent? Because
Right.
again, that's a responsibility, a role, and that's a career, right? Because parenting is a career.
Yeah.
Can't minimize the impact of parents, moms,
Mm-hmm.
dads.
Yeah.
But ask yourself, like, who do you need to be?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who do you need to be? And it's okay for every once in a while to say, you know what, I'm exhausted from this role as a parent, and so I'm going to give me some me time. I'm going to
Yeah.
get my feet done. I'm going to get my, take a shower. I'm going to get a bath, whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So I think once you continue to explore those things that you loved before you got into that new role, then you hold on to parts of you that need to be nourished.
Okay. Y'all, we got a few more minutes left. If you got a question, drop it in the chat. So, oh, wow, that was fast. Lynette wants to know, is forgiveness necessary, or can it be, I'm just done with someone or something?
I don't think those things conflict, right?
Okay.
Again, we talked about how forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, because forgiveness doesn't mean I need to stay connected to you. Forgiveness is, hey, I do forgive you. This hurts. And because it hurts so much, I can no longer be connected to you. And I don't trust that you will take care of me in another moment while I'm vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So I do forgive you, but I recognize that our connection is just not safe for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm done. I forgive you, but I'm done.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
disrupted the opportunity for us to have a long lasting relationship.
But what if you say, I'm done, but then you like, okay, I'm gonna give him one more chance, but then I'm done. Well, one more chance, then I'm done. Because one thing my therapist had me do one time was write a letter to whoever I was angry at. And I spent a lot of time writing. I wrote multiple letters to different people. And then
Mm-hmm.
she said, now go outside and burn them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it was like a release. It was like, you know what? I got all this out, all that I needed to say. And it was from people from years ago.
Yeah.
We haven't talked, nothing, not, so it was something that allowed me to release it. So which brings me to my next question of, how do you, I mean, that's just one way, but what other ways would you advise someone to just release, let go, surrender?
Well, first we got to identify the real emotion and the real pain and the
Mm-hmm.
real wound that's there, right? Because we can talk about anger, but what's under there? Hurt, it's
Mm-hmm.
the pain, it's fear, it's a whole bunch of different things. So once we identify that, how that really made it feel, how we really made we're made to be felt, right? What do we need at that particular moment to grow from it? Right. And there's so many different things to do. Like there are journals, like you said, there's letters. For me, what I used to do when people would say something to me, especially via email or text, I
Mm-hmm.
would text what I really want to say, but I didn't send it, and that was a relief for me.
I
Or
do that.
the journal, I have a whole journal from way back in the day that says what I really wanted to say was, And then I took from that
Mm-hmm.
what the point that I wanted to get across. Because part of it is it's a difference between revenge and justice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Revenge wants to harm, justice wants the truth.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Woo, that's deep. All right, last question. What advice do you have for someone who does feel lost and they just don't, that maybe they don't have enough money to go to therapy, or they just really just don't know how to begin? I know we talked about it at the beginning, but maybe remind them what you said.
Yeah. If you don't have the money to go to therapy, again, utilize Google, find a definition of identity. There's a lot of different books out there. I think Miles Monroe has a whole book with a workbook that says "Who am I?" There's other different things. Again, we talked about the river,
Mm-hmm.
right? You talk about the river. When you were first born at the beginning of the river, what process did you go to get to where you are now? Um, Again, what do I like? What do I don't like? Why do I like it? Why don't I like it? What would I do if I had all the money in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
why? Um, and also give yourself permission to switch and understand and change, and the grace to know that we're constantly growing and getting to know ourselves.
And the process will keep going, right, Paul? It just keeps going.
Yeah,
Oh, let's see. Someone wants to know. I think her name is Ali. I can't see that. But family differences isn't excluded from the I forgive. Nevertheless, they aren't allowed to get a pass. Is that selfish?
absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, that's like a whole segment. But when you
Yeah.
when you think about family, we're told to allow people in our families to harm us, and to forgive, and to forget, and to endure, and to sacrifice, and to
Hmm.
stay in harm's way, and to pretend like it didn't happen, and to give them a pass. And that's not okay. That's what you're describing as being self-aware. That's not selfish. I'm self-aware that this person harmed me. There
Hmm.
hasn't been, there hasn't been any repair. There hasn't been any accountability, and there hasn't been any changed behavior.
Hmm.
So what I need to do is protect myself, right? What I need to do is set the boundary and understand that my relationship with this person is going to be different. And it could just be one particular area, like money. I will never let this person borrow money again, right?
Right.
Harm me financially. This person is physically, when they get around, they are physically abusive, they're emotionally abusive, mentally, psychologically, physically, spiritually, whatever that looks like, they're
Hmm.
abusive. So I can give myself permission to not be in harm's way, family
I
or
think
not.
yeah, I think that probably that right there probably helps a lot of people, because I think we do tend to think we got to give family a pass. Tammy wants to know, what is the best way to categorize forgiveness as a thought, feeling, or action?
Forgiveness is a process. So it requires a thought, right? Which
Hmm.
impacts the way you feel, which then you get to determine what your action is, right? Or it can be it's kind of like the CBT model, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, when it talked about feelings and impact thoughts and impact action, right?
Hmm.
It's cyclical. So when you have that feeling, investigate that feeling, and what do you think about it? All right, or whatever that thought is, how does that make you feel? And you get to decide what the action is next.
Okay. That doesn't mean be petty. It does not mean be petty.
It's petty Paul, but
Let's see. Any more questions before we wrap up? This has been great, Paul. We might have to do a segment on family, because that seems to be a
absolutely.
huge topic. Well, let everybody know where they can find you. I know I mentioned it at the beginning, but I'll let you tell everybody.
Yeah, so everybody can find me at bashewilliams.com. That's what my website is. That's what my blog is. A lot of information on there as well. My practice website, we are licensed in Maryland, in DC, and Virginia. That's heartsandmindcounseling.com. On all social media platforms is Bashe Williams. That's IG. That's YouTube. That's Facebook. TikTok is Win Love Alliance. I'm also starting a new TikTok for myself because there's some things that don't really fit When Love Aligns, mental health stuff and
Yeah.
some of my personal experiences. But that's under Basha Williams on TikTok. So that's where you can find me. If you Google Basha Williams, something about me will pop up.
Paul gonna make y'all use Google. Thank you so much, Paul, for coming back on Celebration. This was a great conversation, and you know I'll be hitting you up to come back again. I'm sure.
I'm excited. I'll be there. I'll be there.
And for everybody else, for more information on therapy and mental health, head to blackdoctor.org. And as for me, I'll see you guys next Wednesday at 7 o'clock for a celebration. And we'll be talking about how to be fulfilled in Black relationships. So that'll be a good one. So I'll see you guys then. Have a great soul filled rest of the week.